Are we back? Yes, thank you. I'm not sure what happened there. I might be the jinx. So I'm going to start. My presentation is called Studios Australia and a few places in between. Um, it's an architectural journey. There's a little bit of personal context, bit of background here. I was born in Villaviciosa, Asturias, in the north of Spain in 1970. My parents immigrated to Australia in 1972 for the second time. They'd already immigrated once before in 62. My mother didn't like it and insisted my father return her to Spain. And then somehow my father convinced her to immigrate one more time. The first time they immigrated with my brother when he was 2 years old, and the second time they immigrated with me when I was 2 years old. So I think my mother's never forgiven my father for that. My family in Spain, who I know and love, call me El Primo Guiri. Those that have holidayed in Spain may know that Guiri is a colloquial Spanish term used by the Spanish to describe foreigners. So I'm born in Spain, but not from there in some respects. And those that know Asturias will know what I mean here. For those who are wondering, who do I follow of the two teams in Asturias, the two football teams, which is like religion? And I think my brother might be on the call. So this is for you, Javier. It's, of course, Real Oviedo. That is an important distinction to be made. Look, my straight line journey, and sort of to give you some context about what I'll be talking about today, as I said, started in 1970 in Villaviciosa. 72 arrived in Melbourne, grew up here, went to school here, primary school, high school, university, started working here. I graduated in 95 and worked here for 5 years. And then year 2001 decided to go live in Europe. I spent a couple of years in Madrid, and fate in 2003 took me to London, where I spent 13 years. And when I joined Grimshaw during this time, and then in 2016, with my role at Grimshaw, I moved back to the Melbourne Studio. But this journey and what I'm going to describe today isn't about a sort of a straight line. It really is, isn't it? It's not really. I guess our journeys don't travel like that. It's about dots. There's quite a few dots on this page, randomly scattered. But if I give you some context, they're dots on a map. And all those dots represent places where I've lived, worked, and lived and worked, bid for work, done projects, lost projects. So I guess I'm grateful for the opportunity, leaving in 2000 to Europe and then joining Grimshaw, a fantastic international studio, has let me scatter a few dots over the around the globe. But today I'm going to focus on just a few of those dots. For those, I'm glad I hear your sighs of relief. Specifically these dots, I'm going to talk to a couple of projects in these fabulous places around the world. And I'm going to start with London. One of the first projects I worked on at Grimshaw, early sort of mid-2000s, was for the University College of London, the Paul O'Gorman Institute for Cancer Research, a leading laboratory for the research into blood cancers. One of the sponsors was a Nobel laureate. A couple of the stakeholders in the stakeholder group were sort of Nobel laureates. So it was quite a esteemed company that we were working with, and it's a fantastic building. But what this building sort of introduced me to many things that I hold dear subsequently. First of all, the building is sort of needing to fit into its environment. It's located in the west of London, or central London really, in the UCL campus in what is Bloomsbury Conservation Area. So the building is a contemporary laboratory building that has to sort of knit itself into its surroundings. And one of the key issues here was understanding sort of the materiality, brick and terracotta facades. But again, a contemporary understanding of use of materials was really, really fundamental. And having come from Australia, where often you weren't able to explore those things with such relish as you were in the UK, being in Europe and having access to terrific sort of manufacturers and engineering, it was a real eye-opener for me. And one of the things especially was understanding detail and craft. This building has a wonderful thin terracotta facade that these blades are 4 metres tall, and they rotate to give this wonderful wave pattern depending as you move down Huntley Street. And you see it differently depending where you stand and in what time of day. But also it was how it was all put together. This tremendous drawing there on screen that I was happy to be involved with drafting some of these things. Just this here are sand cast stainless steel castings. This facade is hung from the roof, so it is a curtain of terracotta and pinned back to the slabs. Again, through another series of sand cast stainless steel castings with these insulated spandrel panels. Just the care and detail working with the Austrian facade manufacturers. They would draw their details in pencil at 1-to-1. So for me, just beginning to understand how things came together in this very sort of special way was a real learning experience for me. And if you understand Grimshaw, it shouldn't come as a surprise. But for me, having come from Australia, and it was a terrific experience working with some wonderful people, putting all this together, and then working on site as the site architect, seeing it all come together was really quite wonderful. And just the care that was taken, and taking the client through the journey that these small things, the sum of all these parts mattered. One of the other sort of impressive features that was this sort of cantilevering stair. The existing building is the old UCL Hospital Nurses Home, which is a Grade 2 listed building. So our building abuts and connects to that. So we have the classic architectural detail of the visual gap of this frameless glass connecting piece. And in that space, in that interstitial space, there was this terrific cantilevered central spine stringer precast concrete stair. I mean, there was so much structural sort of reinforced steel in that precast stringer beam. It really is a steel stringer with a thin shell of concrete. But again, that all cantilevers off the floor plates and is connected to the glass facade with these simple pin joints that allow the stair to move. It moves quite a bit and allows these glass restraining fins to slide up and down. There is no mastic or silicon or mechanical fixing here. So this whole system, stair, fins and glass, all move in unison. And again, that was just working out the dynamics of that and understanding that attention to detail was a terrific experience for a young architect. And again, working on some of these drawings, just trying to resolve that. It wasn't all glamorous. You can see here there's some cast-in conduit. There was no face-fixed light fittings here. They use light fittings under the half landings. So I also had the privilege of doing those cast-in conduit drawings, which is the less glamorous part of architecture. But I guess we all go through that learning curve. And the other thing I realised too was bang for buck. It's a simple series of stacked boxes, the building, of Grade 2 labs. There's a Grade 3 lab on the roof space. So working to budget. So if you look at the detail of the section here, all of that cast, facade, terracotta, precast concrete happens in this sort of front 5-metre write-up space. The rest of it is block work and simple stacked boxes. So I was understanding that part of the brief was that the building had to have a shot front to the street. They wanted to showcase these tremendous researchers doing life-changing work. So it was a shop front. I mean, the researchers had a view about that. So we put all our effort in terms of budget and detailing to the front, saving our money at the back. So bang for buck was really important in order to respond to the most critical parts of the brief. So I was starting to get an education about craft, materiality, context, conservation architecture, which is something quite new to a new country like Australia, but quite entrenched in Europe, and understanding sort of, I guess, budget, the politics of budget. And then the interior spaces, again, this is the write-up area where all the researchers do the work, nice day-lit spaces through those terracotta louvers, these wonderful precast soffits, the reception area, French limestone, this anthracite desk. So celebrating materiality, and it was quite deliberate choices. There's some off-form in situ concrete, the existing handmade bricks of the listed building next door, European oak, but not selected, so we were expressing the knots and the veins, and the stone to the reception desk, again, expressing the natural characteristics. The building, again, with its cast finishes and was quite machine-like, but the interior materiality, we were very keen to explore, I guess, the warts and all imperfection of it all as a bit of a contrast. One of my favourite pieces of the building is these precast soffits to the run-up areas that follow the force diagram. So where the forces are working here, supported by the column, the precast concrete is up to 450 millimetres thick, but where their forces aren't working in these coffers, it's scooped out and they're right down to about 90 millimetres thick. So this column is holding this piece on these flanges, and it suspends the pieces adjacent. And again, that was working with a Belgian precast contractor. It was a tiny firm in Belgium, but very specialist work. And again, it was really, really working out the finest details. And the point of all this was concrete only where you needed it. So there was a real exploration of materials for that building. And like I said, for me, it was a wonderful introduction to Grimshaw. I'll talk about the next project, which is London, and I talk about this because it's a completely different end of the spectrum, but it set my career on a specific trajectory. My boss at the time, Mark Middleton, who I believe might be on the call, sort of asked me to do some work at Heathrow, a seconded role out at Heathrow Airport, and I was quite reluctant, but Mark assured me it was going to be a good idea, and he was not wrong. And as a result of that, I worked on several Heathrow Airport master plans, 2 runway and 3 runway, before this latest one. And it was really where I was learning about materiality, detailing, the craft of architecture. This was about the strategy, really. Understanding high-level, detailed planning, complex statutory issues, and a very large client cohort. A lot of my time on this project was spent going through little thumbnails, understanding all the permutations of runway locations, terminal locations, and literally cutting and pasting them on plans with the client. But it was really a fascinating understanding of how an airport works in all its parts, how it works in its statutory framework. And basically, it was a sort of a master's class in international aviation, for which I really began to take a real interest in. It was fascinating. Again, it's the complexity, so many interesting moving parts, and it's distilled into these images that were used for press. But it sort of set me on a path. And as a result of that, after 2 years, well, it started as a 3-month secondment. It ended up being nearly 2 years. I left that project and I was considered a sort of an expert in aviation. At the time, I didn't realise that, but then I kind of quickly realised that I'd learned an awful lot there. So back in the studio, one of the sort of next aviation projects I worked on was Istanbul's new international airport. And whereas I was talking about the UCL about craft, Heathrow about understanding strategy, what this airport project brought me about was scale. This is a brand new international airport in Istanbul. This is a rendering that we did to present the idea. And this terminal, brand new terminal, is 1.2 million square metres of GFA. That's quite mind-boggling, really. And this is the terminal that was, after design was resolved and submitted, built about 2 years later at incredible speed. It's just a very, very, very large building. So all that I'd learned at Heathrow about aviation and terminal planning was understanding how to, in the first instance, get the footprint right, so that people wouldn't be walking for kilometres and kilometres to get their gates. So there was quite a bit of planning about understanding where you could optimise the building shape. But then the other thing that occurred to us all working on the job was just simply the scale and the need that the client had, that it had to be built, it had to be beautiful, but built quickly and efficiently. So you can see some of these images. These are large 54-metre spans, big, large, tall spaces, top lit. But understanding the challenges of that, as an approach to design. And again, this is something I realise now and at the time, just how we work at Grimshaw, understanding these complex problems and trying to address them in a beautiful, simple way. And architecture and engineering are never too far removed from each other in the work we do. And that's something that I began, again, to appreciate at these sort of, gigantic scales. So just understanding that, like the roof structure, simple columns, sort of tree columns holding up these units, the main dome suspended from those coffers, and then the infill between the structural coffers. And then that ends up with this sort of these efficient, simple tabletop units that you see here on the right, and they give you these very large, efficient spans. And then you just repeat them. In this case, stamp them out, and you get this very grand, simple, beautiful, efficient way of designing and ultimately building. So I guess these images here sort of the architectural expression of that idea. And I don't have time to talk about the inspiration we took with these top lit domes from Hagia Sophia. I imagine they you can see all of that, but again, understanding that it's not just about a structural efficient system, it has to have some meaning and beauty too. And it's that distillation of that coalescence of ideas that is important to the way we work at Grimshaw, and something I take with me onto every project. From Istanbul, I'm going to move on to Muscat in the beautiful Arabian Peninsula in Oman. I was doing quite a lot of aviation work, and an opportunity came up to work on something completely different, which I thought I would try. Again, encouraged by Mark, I said, why not? A Botanic Garden, something I'd never done. I'd visited some as a child, but not much interest in it. And what struck me in my first visit to Muscat was how beautiful the place is. I had been to the Emirates, Qatar. I'd spent some time in the Doha office with Grimshaw, living there. And I thought not much of the Gulf states, but Oman and Muscat is like old Arabia. It's sort of like you'd imagine it in the movies, like Lawrence of Arabia. It was really, really beautiful. And with that came a quick understanding of the responsibility of the project. And I guess from site, we arrived there. This was a special project under the auspices of the Sultan Qaboos, who has subsequently passed away. And this is one of the last of his three nation-building projects that had special sort of permission. It had started already, and I've got to say, by a Spanish firm who I won't name, I don't think are in business anymore, and they had started with these interventions. And this is a photo of what we got when we arrived there, and they just brutalised the landscape. You can see here, this is one of the Corn Mubarak, one of the hills on the site, and they had literally just carved a big chunk out of it, as if someone had taken a big bite out of what is the main geological feature on the site. So the client was quite distressed about this, and to their credit, decided to stop the project and start again. We had convinced them that we could do this, so we had to repair the damage and come up with a new scheme. And this, again, some images, these are some of the spaces for mechanical plant, these giant sort of bunkers in this pristine desert landscape. And then some of the buildings that had already been built for the teaching spaces were these sort of faux architectural responses, these fake castellated sort of concrete blockwork sort of pastiches. It was really quite distressing. There we are in the middle of this giant 10-story high bunker that was going to be filled with mechanical plant. Literally, that's me there wondering, my God, what are we what are we going to do? We can't fix this. But I guess what we did, what most people do, most men do, we climbed to the top of the hill and had a good look. We spent a couple of days out there. And for me, it was understanding my light bulb moment here was the power of place and landscape. Okay, I've been asked to take a pause. Yes? We're good? Terrific. Thank you, Esther. So, yes, this for me was understanding, whereas, for example, in aviation work, you are literally making a brand new ground. The airfield, the runways, the aprons, you are literally, they need to be flat, work to gradients and very tight tolerances. So you're building a brand new ground. This for me was something completely different. It was understanding that actually the architecture needs to fit around these pristine landscapes. And that's quite an obvious thing to say, perhaps, but it was quite new to me, and I really relished that. Here is me with the chief botanist there. We spent a lot of time before we even started to draw anything, understanding the client, the brief. Obviously, Grimshaw has lots of experience in this, having done the Eden project and several other botanic gardens, but not in a desert environment, which has very specific botanical requirements in very special endemic species. So here I am trying to understand them, hands on hips, thinking, my God, is that a tree or firewood? But that's a sort of 500-year-old baobab tree. So it was a really terrific learning experience about really interrogating the client's needs, a specialist brief, and taking the time to understand that. So what drove the base planning was the landscapes at the moment, but the Botanic Garden is trying to represent the 7 key habitats of Oman, which are varied and beautiful, from 5 desert habitats to the pink salt plains to what happens in the south, which is this phenomenon called the Harif Nissalala, which for a couple of months every year the clouds come off the Indian Ocean and get stuck and form this rainforest paradise in the hottest months of the Arabian summer. So we sort of started understanding, and these are some of my drawings, trying to understand how some of these relationships between these habitats needed to happen. They need to tell a botanical story in an order that is correct, but also we need to make sure that visitors appreciate and understand the story they're trying to tell a learning story as well. So there's a pedagogical aspect to our design, and also something that that is of interest to people. So it's a tourist attraction. This project will be subsidised for the first couple of years, but then it will rely on visitor ticket sales. So it was sort of just a deep immersion into very specialist ideas. So we sort of how we arranged the buildings. These are some of the early options. The southern biome, which talks to the southern habitats, a northern biome, which talks to the northern habitats, which are high altitude fruit trees. The southern is captures this cloud phenomenon, and desert habitats in between. So exactly, again, understanding that we are in one of those habitats here in the desert, and the visitor journey and journey comfort and journey times, again, was something we had to consider. So through that evolution, this is the current scheme, which also then introduced a chairlift, cable car. So you could access the site from above and see these habitats below you, a buried car park, which was part of those bunkers you saw earlier. And again, these high-performing biome structures. Normally a greenhouse with a cold climate and sort of housing plants that live in warmer climates. Here we're doing the opposite. This is a hot climate, and some of these greenhouses are holding plants that exist in cooler climates. So there's some clever engineering here in terms of taking sun, Fresnel rays, superheating oil, and making cool air from phase change. So again, understanding taking what we have a lot of, which is sunlight, and turning that into energy and cools. And these are some of the images of the scheme, the final scheme. This is the northern biome, the cable car station, the gift shop. This is an interior shot of the southern biome when the Kharif is happening, so when it's in its rainforest mode. And then when the clouds blow away 2 months later, it goes into this sort of brown mode. And again, just we're representing that in this southern biome. These are some images of the works going on site at the moment, which is terrifically exciting. This is the northern biome again, and even at this scale, this sort of this muscular structure, still these lovely details, these pin joints at the base, finding beauty in the simplest things is really something that I cherish working on these types of projects. Again, some mock-ups for the glazing units for this northern biome in situ, testing, understanding that. So from that, I went back to aviation, a project in Lima, Latin America. And here I employed a bit of strategy. Again, my boss at the time, Mark, I said, there's a bit of a project in Latin America where I'd like to see if we can go for this, Mark. We didn't normally work in Latin America. It was considered sort of a new territory for us with great risk. But I thought, well, there was a couple of Spanish-speaking architects in the London studio, and I said, well, how about, and in the New York studio also, I said, well, how about I have a go at this? So I did. I sort of used my guile and strategy and contacts, and I chased this project. I worked it hard with clients, visits to Latin America, sort of contacts through some of the engineering firms based in Latin America, using my poor Spanish, and ended up winning it, which was terrific. Subsequently, I managed to lose it too. But that's a different story. But it was a thrilling win because it represented a new territory for us. But also, I had the privilege of visiting Lima as part of that chasing the work, and I really fell in love with the place. Again, we try to understand the place, but understanding that Lima is a very urban city. But again, through much terminal planning with the engineers, but again, understanding that it's a place rich in culture and history, we try to weave science, art together in some early model making, trying to understand these complex geometry through some parametric modelling. The roof panels. There's 3 different roof panel types that make up this beautiful woven roof. Because the client, again, was worried about, like, well, how expensive this is going to be. Understanding that Lima is, the construction environment is perhaps not as sophisticated as it used to in Europe. So we had to bear that in mind. And again, understanding these structural systems to give us large spans, which invariably allow for future flexibility. And the terminal building would be designed and delivered in 2 stages. But what I really appreciated here was just understanding place and people, whereas Oman was about the natural habitat. Lima is a gritty, sort of crazy place. And there was a big client team there from all over the world. And these meetings crammed into these little rooms with Spaniards, Colombians, Germans who were part of the client team. Peruvians, it was a terrific mix. Again, lots of sort of analysis of shapes and involved terminal planning. But just understanding the people we work with, this group that came from everywhere. The image on the right, it makes me smile. My colleague here, Nick Solomon, was presenting, and the crowd was not happy, folded arms. But we got to the punchline, and the image on the left, the crowd is not happy. The image on the right is when we won them over. So, so there's some smiles and looks of wonder. But what struck me too was how important the project was for Lima. It's a city that is hardworking, 10 million people. Most people working very, very hard. And every time I'd visit, I'd go back to Lima about once every couple of weeks, and I'd go through the existing airport, and people would say, "Why are you here?" That's I'm working on the new airport project. And invariably, every person was like, I'd get special treatment. I'd be rushed through because it was like, oh, it's such an important project for us. It talks to prosperity and hope in such a hard-working city. All the people I met there really inspired me. And I guess it made me realise that, yes, some of these large infrastructure projects that we are lucky enough to work on at Grimshaw are transformational. I mean, in sort of developed countries, of course they are. We talk about urban realm and transport connectivity, and that's wonderful. But in developing countries, these really are nation-building projects. And the pride of the team is something I won't ever forget. And knowing that some lines on a page, can bring prosperity if we are careful and listen and do it right. So that for me was quite an important project. I'm not sure if it changed me, but it really was a wonderful, wonderful experience. I'm going to now talk about a small project in Canberra, in Australia's capital city, when I moved back to Australia after 13 years in London. There was a chance to come back to the Melbourne Studio on the back of some airport work that I was able to help with, and we won a project, and I was asked, would you like to go back? And I thought it was time to come back to one of my homes. But one of the first things I did when I got back, because the airport project was stalled, was work on a tiny little competition for a very, very, very small greenhouse in the Australian Botanic Garden in Canberra, the brand new National Conservatory. This was 500 square metres with a budget of about 4 million Australian dollars. So it was very small. And I guess it spoke about scale, which I began to understand in a very different way about Istanbul. It spoke to landscape, which I really resonated with me after working on Oman, again, but a very different type of landscape. So I was keen to apply the things that I'd learned, but clearly in a very different environment with a very different architectural response. Spent a few trips in Canberra on the site, which is sort of native bushland in a bushfire-prone zone. And it was about a very sort of topographic, sort of rich site, so very hilly on the side of Black Mountain. So this was about burying this little building deep into the side of its mountain, building as little envelope as we needed to because the budget was very tight, and also developing a user experience that would bring you underground and you'd pop up into this lovely little beautiful greenhouse. So the early sketches, we developed those, and this lovely little pavilion building we managed to shortlist and went to Canberra to present to the jury. And again, it was understanding the visitor journey. These buildings have to perform. They've got to build plants alive in them. They've got to propagate, and the plants need to prosper within these buildings. So the sort of environmental controls are really critical. So again, it's about, I guess, another Grimshaw idea is that the buildings, the architecture, it needs to work hard. It's not just about a beautiful thing. It has to be beautiful, but it has to be doing everything it can structurally, dynamically, environmentally. You know, we're dealing with the forces of nature, wind, gravity, sun, water, scarcity of these things. So again, understanding that, working very hard with the specialists and consultants, sort of hand in hand, and that architecture is not always prime, that it forms part of a suite of experience and expertise. So that is something that is pretty fundamental to how we work. It's strange for architects to say that, because normally architecture is the most important thing we do, and of course it is. But understanding that where it fits, I think, is something that I've come to appreciate deeply. Sadly, we didn't win that, by the way. We came very close, but it was a terrific experience. I'm mindful of time, so I'm just going to wrap up with these, like what I've been doing in the last sort of 2 or 3 years. Firmly entrenched as a partner in the Melbourne Studio, one of 2 partners. So, being one of 2 partners in a studio of nearly 100 people, you spend a lot of time running the studio, which is a new experience for me. So, dealing with resource issues, contracts, rent, budgets. It's been fascinating, but still being involved heavily with the core business, which is architecture. So these are just some things. I mean, back in Australia, we managed to shortlist on the world's biggest airport competition, which was the new Terminal 5 at Changi, and this was the biggest submission I have ever done. It was gigantic. It was like an airport terminal brief of like a Rolls-Royce brief, everything you could think of, as you'd expect from Changi. Again, a very large team with terrific people to work with. Another thing, you're working with the best engineers, the best planners, the best interior designers, the best landscape architects. We even had the best cartoonist in Singapore who sort of captured us for posterity in this Where's Wally montage. That's me on the laptop. It was probably one of the busiest times of my life. But again, a very large 75 million passenger, 500,000 square metre sort of state-of-the-art airport terminal. We made final 3 and spent a year and a half on this competition, working very hard in London, Melbourne and Singapore. And this was, as you'd expect from Changi, all about passenger experience and sort of these moments. I also then, the project I originally came to Australia for was the refurbishment transformation of Melbourne Airport, and we've just delivered the first part of that 5 years later, which is the arrivals hall, which for me is like my hometown airport, and there's a bit of hometown pride because I do remember popping to the airport as a little kid in my pajamas, waiting sometimes for my brother to come back from overseas trips or family and so forth. So the arrivals hall is special for many migrants who grew up in Melbourne. So the chance to be able to reimagine it was really exciting for me. And again, introducing craft. That's a spotted gum natural timber that is local, but interpreting it in a contemporary and sort of machined way, integrating the lighting and the signage, and just paying real attention to the touch, the understanding that people get very close to these surfaces, and in airports sometimes they're quite difficult, stressful places for people. And again, this is more of a challenge in Australia than in Europe, but mock-ups, testing, bespoke detailing, and making sure you're there at the factory, inspecting it, these aluminium billets for the facade system. That's what working Grimshaw in Europe taught me, that attention to detail is important, that the little things form the sum of the parts, they inform the whole. And that's still one of the most exciting parts of the project. That's one of the project architects, Elisa, who's in awe at the quality, because we were really doubtful. And then we've been doing some work into China. In aviation, obviously things are slow at the beginning of COVID, but China was quite busy, first into the pandemic, first out. So we've done some. We are preferred bidder on this one, expecting to be announced as winner, hopefully any day soon, in Ningbo. We are down to final 2 in Nanjing. the new terminal there. And this is the new Terminal T4 at Shenzhen, which we didn't win and was awarded to Foster's, but we did pick up the Shenzhen Metro Hub. So it's a new territory for us at Grimshaw and a new territory for me. And again, I'm very excited about that. Never a dull day working as an architect for a national brand. That's it. I just did want to thank Grimshaw. I showed this photo when I was, this is at Nick's gold medal, and I'd been made a partner not much before this. And this is sort of like this photo reminds me like a scene out of Reservoir Dogs. And for me, it was a real thrill to be at the Institute of Architects in Portland Place in London, attending Nick's gold medal ceremony. It was like a boy's dream come true. I was born in Asturias, grew up in Springvale in Melbourne, and never did I think I'd be here in such esteemed company with 19 other partners. There are many people to thank. Mark Middleton's in this photo, and I believe on the call. Special thanks to him. Yes, you were right, Mark. And I want to thank the SAS again. This is a bottle of El Gatero that I popped the cork on in London just before coming home back to Melbourne. And I can tell you, Spain's finest cider does travel well. So thank you y muchas gracias.
Andrew, thank you to you. That presentation was terrific, and you really opened up your journey. That is quite thrilling, quite a thing. Make me personally jealous as an architect, and I hope one day I achieve some of those great projects. I have captured some questions for yourself, some attendance. So we can start by the general ones.
Yes.
One person is asking if you could share your thoughts of the way that Grimshaw faces, if any, project designs and deliveries between European and Australian designs. So the main difference there is Grimshaw faced them differently.
Yes, I mean, there are differences. I was trained in Australia and worked here for 5 years, and generally, I think working in Europe is a real luxury. Well, for me, it was just the access to that market, specialist knowledge, manufacturing. You could draw something and it would be made. So some of those stainless steel castings, they're all bespoke. They came from Germany. The terracotta came from Cennini in Italy. The stone from France. The precast units from Belgium. Very specialist, bespoke, tailored responses. In Australia, that's more difficult. It just is. We are far away. The supply chains are more limited. To be honest, client appetite sometimes is more difficult, I guess. So you are choosing sort of generic products more, and you're looking for your opportunities. But I've got to say, working internationally, it's part of the challenge. You know, you need to understand the local market. So delivering a project in Lima is very different to delivering a project in central London. Very different. So how you detail it, how you design it, the choice of materials. It's folly to go to Lima and design a beautifully detailed steel building. They build everything out of concrete. So you need to understand that. Your detailing has to understand that. So it's really important to know place, know supply chain, know the construction vernacular, because you can really get it. Well, you can set yourself up for failure. But yeah, Australia and Europe, yes, that was my challenges. It's yes. Well, I guess from an architectural detailing point of view, perhaps the market here is slightly less mature. I won't say less sophisticated, at the risk of offending anyone. But yes, going to Europe after working here, it was like, wow. It was like finding an extra layer in that box of chocolates that was hidden. Wow, there's all these other chocolates in this box, not just the standard ones.
As a designer, you feel more freedom in Europe due to there is a more refined and more access to craft materials, to craft solutions. Many countries around you providing powerful industries and all that.
It pains me. Yes, but that's true. Yes. Oh, look, you've got to work hard in Australia, and you can find manufacturing expertise, but you've got to work hard, and then you've got to convince your clients, which is sometimes the challenge.
Mm-hmm. gonna start early, right? There is another one here, a general question about do you see the airports in the future after COVID? What type of impacts do you think it's going to bring into the design of them?
Yeah, look, yes. I mean, I think the key thing, and we've already designed this way in airports, is about flexibility. So, I mean, we like to express these very large spans because it's wonderful structural architecture, but also it gives you flexibility in how to rearrange these floor plates. But I mean, the contactless travel, I mean, that technology has existed for quite some time. There's been some statutory barriers. Some government agencies still want to touch you and frisk you, you know. They don't have to, but they want to because it makes you feel nervous and, you know, they feel like they're in control. So that technology about not having to touch anyone and get all the way through security, passport control, biometric control, that already exists. I think what COVID has done is probably accelerated that or made it more necessary or easy for that to become normal. And I think that's what will happen, that sort of a less contact environment. I think people's tolerance for being sort of searched and touched and put your hands up and patted down, and I think that's going to change. But like I said, that technology, we've already been working in that space, sort of fast travel, seamless travel. The barrier to that has been just a reluctance from the authorities, but I think that's probably moved away now. That's become simpler.
So do you think those extra layers will make traveling a bit slower in the airports? Will cause delay or the process, or not necessarily?
No, I think it should make things quicker. It should. Yeah, in theory, it should. Yes.
So technology will be ahead of the COVID problems and bring us the solution.
Look, yes, I think Look, the challenges in the airport environment will remain. I think security will still be an issue. That's what changed. Sadly, all the extra touch points come to about dealing with threat, like taking your laptop out, liquids. That is the challenge. But again, new scanning technology. So I think COVID will make some things simpler, but some obstacles will remain, I'm afraid.
This is a bit of more personal one. For you, airport was first love, or is something that with time grow on you? The typology of project?
No, it grew on me. No, I'd not worked in that environment at all, and it was that secondment role working for BAA in the BAA office as the design manager. And then curiously, with Ferrovial had just bought the airport, so my employer as a seconded role was Ferrovial. So I was working with a brand new team that had just moved over from Madrid. So my Spanish helped facilitate that, and I got a real in-depth understanding. And then I just realised the complexity of these type of projects was something that fascinated me. Sort of you could design an airport terminal and answer many of the functional questions, but you could get it so wrong. It would be a horrible experience. We've all been in those terminals, and they might tick a spreadsheet like this terminal is very, very efficient from a aviation planning point of view, but it could be a horrible experience. So it was understanding all that complexity and still trying to resolve that. That's what appealed to me, and it's kind of like as a kid with Meccano, big scale, the bigger things you could build. Some of these things, you were working on these tremendous buildings that were like, wow. So yes, it wasn't a first love. No, it was a growing appreciation.
It's definitely something that you show your passion for. So I can see where you're at now.
I'm a sad aviation geek now, I'm afraid. Yes.
You're flying high, Andrew. You're flying high. Do you feel any differences in the way that design and or project delivery is approached? Comparing, I guess the question is comparing the two countries.
Oh, look,
Well, Europe and Australia.
Yeah, look, I worked on a couple of Spanish projects, and certainly Lima used the sort of the Spanish system. So there are, proyecto constructivo. There are differences in terms of stages of work, contractual differences, but I've got to say, really, they're they're much of a muchness. At the heart of it, I found myself, you find yourself, you're basically, the role of the architect is you're doing the same things, in my experience. So the nomenclature, working in some of on the Latin American projects, I had to get myself a good technical dictionary, understanding technical architectural terms, like, fuste, things like, sort of tercha, things like that. How do you say truss? So there's a lexicon issue, but at the heart of it, you're resolving technical problems, you're understanding a brief, you're talking to stakeholders, you're manifesting that through an architectural expression, whatever that may be. Like I said, I hope I've illustrated how Grimshaw and I approach things such as craft, scale, place, engineering, responsive performing architecture. But that is, I think every architect in the world does that. But yes, different language, different codes. But for me, I've not found it difficult to work in all of these places as an architect. I found it difficult with some technical things, but the core role, no.
You don't change the way you work, you just adapt to the system or the process in place.
You may change the way you resolve a problem or design, like I said, Hector, understanding the skill set, the supply, it's for a place like in developing countries like Lima, you can't, let's bring in all this cast steel. From where? Well, you could, you're going to bring it in on boats? And no, you've got to understand how people build there. But that's so that will change how you might approach a sort of a tectonic question. But that's just another, that's like answering a slightly different brief. But how you work, no, I found no. A little project where we've done recently at the South Pole in Antarctica. And again, you think, oh God, the South Pole. Yes, real technical challenges, but the approach. Look, for me, it's encouraging because hopefully society will still need architects when the robots take over.
I hope so. The creativity part of the human beings is not easy to take over by machinery. We're even not sure where it comes in the first place, right? We try to explain where I just come from. It's not something you can replicate in a machine. I have another interesting question here for you, and it's saying anything. Well, I'll summarize it. Anything you have learned here in Australia that you could take back to Europe as something that, let's say, Australia environment teach you that you can implement in Europe?
Oh, look, I've got to say, I was fortunate. I mean, the education, the architectural training, the architectural education I received here, stood me in very good stead. I got to Europe, and I quickly realised that there was high regard for Australian trained architects, and I think just the attitude and approach to hard work. I mean, that's not special to Australian trained architects. I'm not suggesting that, but just a practical approach, clear-minded thinking. I don't know. I think the architectural education did instill some things that I found advantageous working in Europe. But again, there's nothing particular about that. But I think, yes, Australian architects I found are very well regarded in Europe, and you come across a lot of Australian trained architects. So I found that very, very useful. And again, I think it's just a very practical approach. Which lets you sort of understand problems and then resolve them, and I don't know, a degree of flexibility and agility, perhaps. People on this call that know you may disagree. They may say, you are not flexible or agile, Perez. I don't know, but I'm glad they're on mute.
I've seen you at work, and I know you're a flexible person.
But yeah, so more than a technical thing, it's perhaps just there's a willingness to learn. I mean, look, I'll be honest with you. as someone who as a migrant in Australia, you feel far from everywhere. So when you go back to Europe or go to Europe, you're like a sponge. Because it's a beautiful place here, but we are very far away, and it's still a very young, immature place in many respects. So a willingness to explore, I think, is sort of what many Australian trained architects have, which is why because my parents immigrated here, and I went back, and my father said to me, "What are you doing?" I think it's just a willingness to explore and absorb as much as you can, I think, is also helpful.
Be more audacious about
it. And I think curiosity is important for architects. I know the architects on this call know that. I don't think you become an architect if you're not curious. You do many other things. You'd make more money and live an easier life.
Don't say so loud. We need more architects in the future. I have one here. Considering all the places you have put the pin down, do you still have any in the bucket list?
Oh gosh, I'd like to return to Latin America. No, I've not worked on the African continent, which we're making some explorations. But look, I've been very fortunate. It'd be greedy of me to say, oh yes, there's many. And again, Grimshaw's a global practice with 9 studios across the world, nearly 600 people. The opportunities, are endless. So again, that curiosity burns brightly. But I wouldn't call them any more bucket list. Like I said, South Pole, I'd never expected to work in the South Pole, but tick. So I think Africa's the last continent, I think, that I hadn't worked on. So that's probably, yes, if I had to choose something on the African continent.
Yeah, definitely. You touch on the desert, you touch on the Southern Pole, and also in jungle. So we can consider Singapore is integrated in a jungle, tropical country. So that's the only pending one for you. I have one more here. It's related to the detailing and just making a note about it. Well, no, it was not really a question. Just congratulations on the love for detail. I did have some questions myself. I can throw you a couple of them about detailing. The first project you were touching on in London, the Institute of Cancer Research. How was the relationship there with the engineers? Because that stair was quite challenging and unique in the design. If I saw properly, it's hanging from the facade, right? At some point.
Yes, fundamental was Bureau Happold. There's an anecdote. We had a structural failure on that project, not with the stair or those self-supporting precast soffits. It was a simple post and beam detail in the reception area. So the simplest part, but basically there was a detail that required a PFC, so a parallel flange channel, as part of the reinforcement detail of the T-beam off the top of the column. The precast manufacturer folded the PFC out of plate that looked the same. It wasn't caught in the shop drawing, and it wasn't caught in inspection, so that failed. And then we turned up to site, they loaded that, and cracks appeared, still propped. So it was like, oh my goodness. The more complicated stuff was worked terrifically, and so it's fundamental. I mean, I think, and the way we work at Grimshaw, sort of, you understand. Nick Grimshaw was one of the pioneers of the British high tech movement, and that's about architecture and engineering are sort of enmeshed. So it was really, and for me again, it was understanding it. Normally, he was like, when I was working in Australia, the engineer will solve that, like as if it goes away and comes back fixed. Whereas at Grimshaw's, I don't know, we with the engineer will design and solve that. And that for me was like, wow. So it was fundamental, but strangely, there was a failure in the simplest part, which probably tells you something too about, everything's important. But yes, it was quite. But the only issue with that stair is that it moves a lot. So some people don't use it. People that have got vertigo, or It does. It's one of its most beautiful things. It literally slides up and down. Those half landings are floating out nearly 4 meters, cantilevered out, but it does move quite a bit. So if you jog up those stairs and someone's on the landing below, they're sort of moving a little. So some people do use the back stairs. So it does go to comfort, understanding people's comfort too. I mean, we could be thinking, what's a wonderful engineering and exercise, but some people don't want to use it. So
well, it's an amazing outcome. It's an attraction on top of an stair.
It does, and those treads are cantilevering off too. So the whole thing does flex quite a bit. For me, it's quite fascinating because I mean, when you talk to young architects, it's like buildings, they're not static, are they? Like you fix them and then no, they are constantly moving. That's obviously an extreme case, but understanding the dynamics of what we do is really, if you don't understand that, things break because it's kind of the laws of nature. So. But Bureau Happold were terrific to work with there, and that was like working hand in hand with engineers from day one.
We recently had an earthquake here in Melbourne, so we understand that the buildings need to move and respond to those things or collapse, and that's not what we want. I would like to throw you a last personal question about the Changi Airport. Thinking retrospectively, what would you change for that competition, if anything?
Oh, look, that had so many moving parts. Look, well, it was such a large team. It was probably that might have been a case of maybe too many cooks. We had we were in conjunction with DP Architects, who are a terrific firm in Singapore. Very, very good people. But I think it was just such a large scale, and it was the brief asked for so many things that maybe we didn't land on a strong idea or a narrative soon enough, and it probably got a little bit. The ideas probably weren't as coherent. This in competitions, you're selling a dream. It's not just resolving the technical or the architectural. You are selling a dream, and maybe we just had we weren't clear enough about that. Whereas the winning scheme was probably technically, well, I understand. Well, the project's been cancelled. It's technically unresolvable, but it sold a dream, perhaps.
Yeah. So you think with a big gesture, architectonically speaking, maybe good landed in another way?
I think that's what the client was looking for, and maybe that's not what but I think that's what the client was looking for. So selling a dream. I think that maybe the winning scheme sold, as you say in Spanish, vendió some humo, not sold smoke, not a dream. But that's I don't want to sound like sour grapes.
Yeah, there is a fine line between the superficial and the real gestures, right? Yeah, always difficult to deal with. Well, Andrew, this has been a terrific experience. We're really grateful to have you here and to enjoy some time and for you to open up for all of us. And I want to wish you all the best. And once you put in your next project in Africa, you can come and tell us about it.
Look forward to it. Thank you, Hector. Muchas gracias. It was terrific putting all that together, and as a Spanish-Australian hybrid, it's a terrific opportunity to speak to that. People ask me Español, Australiano. It depends where I am. I thank you. Continued good work with SAS, and I look forward to seeing you soon in person.
Thank you, everybody in the other side listening. It's been a pleasure. Take care and stay safe.